Thank you for being here with me today. If this story touches your heart, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to support the channel. Your support truly means a lot, and it helps me keep bringing you more stories like this. At Helix Gate, on the outer medical border of the Vesper Reach colonies, Dr. Nadia Vale stood on the command deck of the Mercy of Earth. She watched the quarantine lights cycle from amber to red for the third time in 1 hour. She was the senior medical commander aboard the ship. On paper, her role was simple enough. She had brought emergency treatment, portable lung support, and field staff from Earth to a cluster of human colonies that had run out of time. In practice, she had arrived at a sealed gate where the law was being used like a blade. The people below needed air, medicine, and time, and every hour of delay took all three away. The main screen showed the border station in cold detail. Helix Gate was built around a split ring of customs arms, docking spokes, and sensor towers. Cargo moved through it every day. Relief ships moved through it every week. But now the channels that should have taken Mercy inside were closed under a level gray biological hold. The hold had been renewed again. Lieutenant Mirasato, her operations officer, looked up from the traffic board. Gate Control has posted another review delay. For hours this time. Nadia did not sit. She had been standing since they entered the inspection lane. Their stated reason? Cross-vector contamination review. Mira hesitated before adding the rest. They also said our emergency waiver is under secondary review by the Interstellar Licensing Desk. Nadia kept her hands flat on the rail in front of the command chair. Below the ship, 3 decks down, her treatment teams were ready in pressure masks and sealed gray-blue field jackets. Portable ventilators were charged. The medicine lockers were sealed but queued. They had practiced rapid descent into failing clinics during the last 5 days of transit, and they were supposed to be planetside already. Instead, they were waiting while people died on the far side of a legal phrase. On the far right of the display, the running mortality estimate from Vesper Reach ticked upward in soft white numbers. Those were Mercy's numbers, built from partial transmissions and old census counts. Official numbers from the gate were lower by almost half. Nadia trusted the official numbers even less with every hour they stayed still. Commander Elias Thorne appeared on the side channel as a frozen icon, his last transmission time stamped 51 minutes earlier. He ran civilian route protection and emergency ground transport inside the colony cluster. He also happened to be the man Nadia had once planned to build a life with before service had scattered both of them to different ends of human space. She had not seen him in 2 years. She had heard his voice 6 hours ago, and it had sounded like a man trying not to let fear leak into the room. Mira lowered her voice. Lumen's Fall just sent another priority ping through a local relay. The pediatric wing is losing pressure support. Nadia turned from the glass. Put it through. The deck speakers cracked once, then carried the voice of a tired woman. This is Chief Physician Rena Sol from Lumen's Fall Emergency Station. Our second oxygen scrubber failed. We have 16 children on assisted breathing and 8 more in triage. If the field cartridges do not arrive before local dawn, we begin rotating support manually. Repeat. We begin rotating manually. The transmission cut in static. Nopli. No drama. Just the flat tone of a professional trying to leave useful information behind. Mira swallowed. Local dawn in Lumen's Fall is 11 hours. Nadia looked back at Helix Gate. 11 hours. She did the timing without meaning to. Dock release. Cargo spin down. Shuttle deployment. Atmospheric descent. Ground handoff. Internal route clearance. If they were cleared this minute, they could still reach the first clinics before the line broke. If they lost 4 more hours, the children in that ward would begin dying one by one in a room that smelled of disinfectant and overheated filters. Open a direct channel to gate control, Nadia said. The answer came as a shaped hologram over the bridge. Prefect Controller Laertes Van appeared seated at a polished station somewhere inside the ring. He had the smooth face and measured posture of a man who had built his career inside procedure. Gray uniform, black collar tab, gold quarantine sash. Dr. Vale, he said, you have already received our update. I received your delay. You receive a lawful quarantine notice. My ship carries sealed treatment modules, negative pressure, drop teams, and emergency field systems cleared under dual Earth and sector bioresponse codes. You reviewed our packet before we even entered your lane. The packet is under secondary review. Then give me a limited corridor. One shuttle, one colony. Escort us if you must. Wenn Berli blinked. That is not possible. Because of contamination risk? Because of law. Nadia held his gaze. Law should not require children to suffocate while their medicine waits within sight of a dock. Dr. Vale, Vin said softly, emotional framing does not change the review process. Nadia had heard that tone before. Calm enough to sound civil. Empty enough to survive any body count. What does, she asked. Verified data. He lifted a hand and brought a public chart into view. The latest certified mortality index for Vesper Reach does not justify emergency override. Nadia studied the chart. She had seen it twice already. It was too smooth. Real outbreaks did not curve like that in weak infrastructure clusters. Real panic did not produce such tidy lines. Your data is wrong, she said. Then submit a revision through proper channels. We did. It is awaiting review. He paused, then added what he thought was mercy. I advise patience. Improper entry could cause larger harm. The channel closed from his side. On the bridge, no one spoke for 3 seconds. Then Mira exhaled through her nose. He closed first. Of course he did, Nadia said. She looked at the sealed gate again. Then she looked at the white mortality number still climbing on Mercy's own estimate. Where did not always begin with ships firing through vacuum. Sometimes it began with a child waiting for a machine that was already in orbit. By ship time midnight, Mercy of Earth had been held for 7 hours. On the treatment decks, Nadia walked the bays herself. She moved through rows of stacked containers marked respiratory kits, antiviral cartridges, sterile tubing, pediatric support frames, and field shelter modules. Her staff straightened when she passed, but not from fear. They wanted to see in her face that there was still a path in. Most of them had worked human colony crises before. Dust lung on mining stations. Salt mold outbreaks on agricultural moons. Frozen water line failures that turned one infection into 5,000. They knew how thin the line was between manageable and irreversible. They also knew that any commander who lied about that line lost trust forever. At Bay 3, Senior Nurse Cala Reyes was checking portable breathing rigs one more time. We're burning morale, Cala said without preamble. We're not the only ones. No, but we can feel it here. Cala closed the panel and looked up. The crew can hear the hospital calls coming through. They know what we're carrying. They know what it means that we're still parked. Nadia nodded. How long can you keep the deployment teams in ready rotation? As long as you want. How long can you keep them believing we'll actually deploy? That was the harder question. Nadia stepped into the supply lane and lowered her voice. I'm not going to promise them a release window I do not have. Cala studied her face. Good. Don't. Just tell us when you decide to stop waiting. Nadia almost smiled. Almost. Back on Mercy, in the small command briefing room on Deck 7, her intelligence liaison had finally gotten a low-band file through from inside Vesper Reach. It came disguised as maintenance telemetry, bounced through civilian relays, then cleaned by Mercy's data team. The file source was Elias. He appeared on a private screen. The light behind him flickered with power fluctuation, and the collar of his route jacket was stained with something dark that might have been grease or blood. Nadia, he said. No title. No formality. He did not have the time. Official numbers are false. Real respiratory load is much higher in Lumen's Fall and carrying into Dreist and Talon Verge. The system drug isn't stabilizing the critical cases. Your Earth protocol did. The few doses we had from old reserves bought people time. He coughed, muted himself, then came back. There's more. Helion stock was moved in before your arrival. Large shipment. Too large for a trial distribution. They are saturating local hospitals with it, even though outcomes are poor. Nadia felt something colder than anger settle in her chest. Who authorized the shipment? Public answer? Sector Emergency Distribution Board. Real answer? He shook his head. Still digging. About route officers pulling manifests, but access is vanishing. Someone is scrubbing. A second voice rose behind him, shouting for stretchers. Elias glanced over his shoulder. When he turned back, Nadia saw that he had not slept. "You need to understand something," he said. "The gate delay is not passive. They are buying time. I just don't know for what yet." Nadia wanted to ask if he was hurt, if he had eaten, if he had anyone covering his back. Instead, she asked the question that mattered now. How long before Lumen's fall collapses? If your cargo stays out here? He looked down once, not because he doubted the answer, but because he hated it. By dawn, they start losing the small ones first. The image froze. The feed cut. Nadia remained seated for a moment after the screen went dark. Years earlier, before distance and duty had torn the shape of their lives in different directions, Elias had once accused her of mistaking endurance for safety. "You think if you keep your voice level," he had said, "the universe will meet you halfway." It had been an unfair thing to say then. Now it felt like a warning from another life. She called a full staff command meeting. The senior officers gathered around the central table. Mira Sato from operations, Cala Reyes from clinical deployment, Chief Data Analyst Joran Pell from systems, Security Lead Anton Sarek, Propulsion Chief Imani Holt. No one asked if the meeting was serious. They already knew. Nadia placed both hands on the table. The official mortality data is false. The treatment being pushed inside the cluster is underperforming. Our protocol is working. Helix Gate knows enough to justify a limited entry and has denied it anyway. Sarek folded his arms. So they're complicit. Likely, Nadia said. Not yet fully provable. Joran pulled a stream up over the table. I matched the public outbreak curve to 3 internal relay dumps from the cluster. The certified data suppresses severe case growth and flattens fatality rise. It's deliberate. Imani cursed quietly. Mira asked the next question. What's our legal room? Shrinking, Nadia said. Which is the point? She let that sit. They want us trapped between delay and violation. If we wait, the colonies pay. If we force entry without evidence strong enough to survive scrutiny, Earth becomes the reckless actor. Sarek's expression hardened. Maybe Earth should stop caring how it looks. Nadia turned to him and hand them the exact image they need. A human ship that broke quarantine law and triggered cross-border panic. He said nothing. He knew she was right. He also knew right answers did not ventilate children. Calla spoke next. Then what is our move? Nadia looked at the table, then at each face around it. First, we prove the data is false beyond denial. Second, we get treatment inside by any lawful avenue, still open. Third, if the lawful avenues are designed to fail, we decide what we are willing to pay to save lives. No one flinched from that phrasing. Mira asked, and if the answer is more than this ship? Nadia thought of Elias, of the sick children, of the Helion shipment, of Controller Ven's polite dead eyes. Then we make sure the price is paid by the right people, she said. By second watch, Mercy began hunting for truth in the spaces where procedure had not yet reached. Joran Pell found the first clear fracture in a cargo discrepancy. Helion Biologics had moved 6 times the volume of a declared emergency stabilization package through Helix Gate in the previous 40 hours. But the receiving hospitals on record only accounted for less than half that amount. Where had the rest gone? The answer arrived in pieces. Some crates had been diverted to private storage under sealed medical authority. Some had gone to clinics that did not exist. Some had simply vanished into the accounting fog that followed any rushed crisis. The missing volume was not just waste. It was leverage. In Mercy's lab, Nadia reviewed the next breakthrough while Calla came in beside her. The ship's team had extracted a meaningful profile from a sample covertly sent out by a maintenance tug. The pathogen targeted lower respiratory tissue aggressively, but did not fully match the strain listed in the gate advisories. Its protein signatures had drifted enough to make approved system scanners slow to classify. That was enough to let an outdated protocol look safe on paper while failing in the real world. It was enough to kill people until a company with the right proprietary filter arrived to save them. Calla entered just as Nadia was reviewing the results. Tell me it's simple. It isn't. Tell me it's fixable. Nadia tapped the assay. Our Earth protocol can interrupt the inflammatory cascade early if it's administered before critical saturation. The Helion package delays fever but doesn't stop the collapse. Calla stared at the screen. So they're flooding the colonies with a drug that looks useful long enough to keep the official emergency threshold low. Nadia met her eyes. That is what looks like. The nurse let out a hard breath. How many people know this? On this ship? Not enough. And outside it, maybe the people making money from it. Calla went very still, then stopped asking for permission. Nadia did not answer immediately. She was thinking past the lab, past the gate, past the next hour. The line between rescue and escalation was starting to disappear. When a narrow inspection window finally opened, Nadia crossed into Lumen's fall under restrictions designed to humiliate rather than help. She was allowed through with diagnostic authority, almost no useful cargo, and 2 approved observers. Before she left that first visit, she broke one more rule without asking herself whether it counted. A boy no older than 12 was helping his father squeeze a manual pressure bag for an older woman whose machine had gone down. His hands were too small for the work. Each press came late. Each breath was shallow. No approved emergency stock had reached that room. Nadia took one of the microdose stabilization kits hidden under the lawful personal allowance in her field case and pressed it into Rena Sol's palm. This buys time, she said. The white-gray observer saw the movement. Dr. Vale, undeclared transfer of pharmacological material is prohibited. Nadia turned to him with a look so flat it stopped him before his training did. Then write it down accurately, she said. You watched a physician treat a patient in respiratory collapse. The observer did not move. Rena did not thank her. She was too tired and too professional for that. She simply loaded the dose, adjusted the bag rate, and watched the old woman's oxygen trace stop falling. When Nadia walked back toward the shuttle, every person she passed understood exactly what had happened. Not the chemistry, not the regulatory exposure, just the simple frontier truth that Earth had sent a doctor who treated the sick when the gate said wait. That truth moved faster than any formal channel. By the time her shuttle cleared atmosphere, Mercy's unsecured civic monitors were picking up local whispers that spread from clinic to dock to family corridor. The doctor from Earth had seen the wards. The doctor from Earth had used her own stock. The doctor from Earth had looked at the numbers and not believed the station. Nadia should have been careful with that kind of mythology. It could make people reckless. It could get civilians hurt trying to force access. But another part of her understood that people under pressure survived on 2 things more than any administration ever admitted: air and the belief that someone, somewhere, was no longer pretending the lie was normal. At 0340 by ship time, Helix Gate finally sent an offer. 1 shuttle only. No medicine cargo beyond diagnostic kits. No breathing support. No antiviral stock. No external personnel beyond Nadia, and 2 approved observers. Mission time capped at 90 minutes. All findings to be reviewed by the gate before any operational change. In other words, she could enter just long enough to witness the dying and leave empty-handed. Mira read the offer twice, then looked up. They want your face on the inside, and the medicine's still locked out here. Nadia nodded, so that when the deaths rise, they can say Earth confirmed the outbreak and still failed to act. Sarek struck the table once with the flat of his hand. Then rejected. No, Nadia said. He stared. No, I'm going in. The room tilted toward her. Calla said, without treatment, with diagnostic authority, with direct eyes, with anything I can carry legally. Nadia turned to Mira. Prep a fast packet. Compact analyzers, handheld scans, microdose emergency kits concealed within personal med allowances. Enough to stabilize a few if we must. That's still almost nothing. It's more than 0. Sarek frowned. And if they detain you? Then you bring the ship home loud enough that Earth hears it. No one like that. They should not. Mira opened her mouth to object, then closed it. You think they need your presence for legitimacy? Yes. And you're going to use that to see what they're hiding? Yes. Calla leaned in. And if what they're hiding confirms all of this? Nadia looked toward the silent red border lights outside the hall. Then patience ends. Over the next 48 hours, Mercy built a network that was ugly, improvised, and profoundly human. A fertilizer hauler out of Dreist carried sterilized tubing in sacks marked soil nutrient mesh. A mining shuttle with 3 engines in 2 different paint colors ferried pediatric masks beneath a declared load of cracked condenser fins. An elderly dispatcher on Talon Verge kept opening and closing civilian traffic windows a few seconds off schedule because, as he told Miron, an unsecured line, the station boys only know how to watch clean patterns. Nadia began sleeping in 20-minute fragments on a fold chair in the command room, boots on, hand over the tablet that tracked clinic outcomes in real time. Every time one route succeeded, she felt the system tighten. Every time one failed, she saw the cost in names. Cala Reyes became the voice of mercy to a generation of overrun colony nurses who had never met her. Nadia would enter the remote med bay at odd hours and hear Cala saying the same things in 10 different forms. Slow down. Count the breaths, not the panic. Use the smaller seal and tuck the cloth under the jaw. No, do not wait for the fever to break. Treat the lungs first. You're not doing this wrong. You're doing it with too little. There's a difference. Those lines spread through the clinics almost as quickly as the medical protocol did. People began repeating them back over local channels. They were no longer just instructions. They were morale in sentence form. But systems that relied on fear always tried to destroy morale before they destroy bodies. Helion representatives began visiting licensed hospitals with offers of priority resupply if administrators publicly denounced the Earth treatment method as unsafe frontier improvisation. Some took the offer. Some pretended to. Some signed, and then quietly ran Nadia's protocol anyway after the cameras left. Meanwhile, Helix Gate began issuing revised contamination alerts every time a civilian craft was suspected of carrying Earth stock. Insurance rates for neutral carriers jumped. Freight brokers withdrew. 2 of Mercy's hired pilots quit, not from lack of courage, but because they had families in other sectors and could see their licenses evaporating in real time. Nadia did not blame them. Pressure this large was designed to isolate by making every private person calculate survival alone. So she changed the arithmetic. She asked Earth Command for nothing more glamorous than debt protection and future legal indemnity for civilian carriers operating in medical support to Vesper Reach. The answer came slower than she wanted, but faster than she expected. Earth could not move a fleet without widening the crisis, but it could put its name behind the people moving medicine. That mattered. The next day, for civilian captain sign-on. The day after that, 12 more sent inquiries. A blockade was never only about ships. It was about teaching everyone nearby that helping the trapped would cost too much. Nadia's job, she realized, was not only to move treatment. It was to make decency commercially survivable long enough for courage to become contagious. When she crossed Helix Gate under escort, the shuttle was no bigger than a lifeboat. The observers assigned to her wore bio-sealed, white over gray, and introduced themselves only by rank and licensing number. Neither made conversation. Neither looked like a medical professional. As the shuttle cleared the ring, Nadia saw Vesper Reach spread ahead in a loose chain of inhabited points around a dim yellow star. The primary settlement worlds were not rich worlds. They had never been rich. Human colonies at the edge rarely were. They were places built by people who had traded ease for ownership and risk for the right to stand on something that answered to them first. Lumen's fall floated beneath the shuttle as a cold brown world with torn cloud bands and scattered light grids across the night side. From orbit it looked calm, civilized, manageable. Then the shuttle banked over the hospital quarter. Emergency beacons painted the landing field in pulsing orange. Vehicles crowded the approach lanes. Half the outer clinic tents had been converted to overflow wards. 3 long cargo shelters had been reworked into oxygen rotation stations. Nadia could see the lines even through the shuttle window. Not lines for supplies. Lines for air. When she stepped onto the landing pad, Elias was there. He looked thinner than she remembered and harder in the face. There was a strip of medical sealant across his left temple, and his route command jacket hung open over a pressure liner damp with sweat. For 1 second, they were simply two people who had once known the shape of each other's lives. Then the moment closed because there were stretchers moving behind him. "You took too long," he said. "I know." He did not say it cruelly. He said it like a fact that had already killed people. The observers stayed close as Elias led her through the reception corridor. No one bothered with ceremony. Nadia scanned patients as she walked, taking covert notes through a wrist unit disguised as an authorized recorder. Low oxygen saturation. Fausse progression. Too many secondary collapses. The official numbers were a lie. At the pediatric wing, she stopped cold. Not because she had never seen sick children. She had. Too many times. But because she could read the math in the room. Not enough machines. Not enough staff. Not enough time. Rena Sol, the physician from the earlier message, met Nadia by the doorway. Her eyes were bloodshot above the mask. "You came without cargo." "I came through the only door they left open." Rena did not waste another second. She handed Nadia a tablet full of patient records. Helion dose outcomes are bad. Fever down, breathing worse by second phase. We started adapting with old Earth reserve stock. The few we got early are holding longer. Nadia scanned 3 files, then 5. The pattern was unmistakable. One of the white-gray observers stepped forward. "Dr. Vale, your review window is limited." She did not look at him, then stand quietly and learn something. The man stiffened. Elias hid the ghost of a smile for about half a second. Nadia moved bed to bed, gathering direct biometric snapshots. By the time she reached the overflow shelter, she had enough to prove the certified outbreak curve had been suppressed. She also had enough to know that proof alone would not save the people already crashing. A little girl on manual support clutched at Rena's sleeve and asked if the ship from Earth had brought the blue mask this time. Rena answered gently, "It's here. We're still unloading." Nadia felt the lie hit her like a strike. When a 90-minute window ended, the observers tried to pull her back to the shuttle. She stopped at the landing line and turned to Elias. "How many colonies are in active respiratory failure?" 3 now, 2 more low-grade. And there's unrest in Dreist because people think the treatment is being hoarded for contract workers. Is it? Yes. By whom? He named a logistics administrator. Nadia did not know. He keeps saying distribution follows license priority, but the priority lists keep shifting. An observer stepped between them. "Dr. Valle, you're out of time." Elias leaned closer before she left. "They're not just delaying you. They're staging the collapse." And Nadia, she met his eyes. If you wait for a clean legal answer, Vesper Reach is gone. Back aboard Mercy, the debate ended. Not in words, in evidence. Nadia transmitted the verified clinical profiles to Earth Command, to every neutral medical station within lawful reach, into 3 human colony network relays with independent emergency archives. She did not publish them openly yet. She was not ready to trigger panic without a way to move on it. But she now had enough for the next step. She formally demanded emergency corridor release under humanitarian preservation law. Helix Gate denied it within 14 minutes. That speed told her everything. Controller Vin came on screen again, serene as ever. The field observations do not alter the certified emergency tier. They expose fraud. They expose variance. They expose preventable death. "Dr. Vale," he said, "you are dangerously close to interfering with a licensed sector response." She answered in a voice so calm, even Mira looked at her twice. "No, I am close to proving one." Then she cut him off before he could end the call first. By dawn and Lumen's fall, for children were dead. Nadia read their ages in silence in the command room, while Mercy's engines idled against the docking restraints. 6, 8, 9, 11. Each one had died within reach of the equipment that could have bought them another day, maybe 2, maybe enough. Calla stood by the table and did not speak. Mira sat with her jaw set, so hard a muscle jumped near her ear. Sarek stared at the bulkhead like it had personally offended him. Nadia folded the death list once and set it aside. "We move." No one asked whether she meant legally. The plan they built in the next hour was not clean. That was why it had a chance. Mercy could not force full entry without triggering immediate seizure, but did not need to. The colonies still had civilian maintenance tugs, agricultural haulers, and short-hop service craft moving within the cluster under limited operational exemptions. Not many. Enough. Nadia broke her cargo into 12 packets instead of one central load. She did it for one reason. If one shipment was seized, the whole mission would not die with it. Field ventilators went into modular shells. Treatment kits went into maintenance cases. Pediatric supports went into civilian aid crates. Nothing was so large that a single confiscation would end the mission. Nothing was so obvious that customs could stop every piece in time. Mira used old route maps from Elias to build drift corridors through service lanes and neglected refuel arcs. Sarek assigned 2 quiet security teams. Not to fight, but to keep frightened civilian pilots moving when pressure hit. Kala reorganized the med staff into remote activation cells who could talk local clinicians through the Earth protocol over low-band channels if physical teams were blocked. Joran Pell routed the first signal burst through redundant civic relays so the instructions could reach multiple clinics at once. If even half the packets got through, it would be enough to tip survival odds in the first 3 clinics. If they all failed, Earth's ship would stand exposed as the reckless actor Helix Gate wanted. Imani Holt asked a question no one else wanted to ask aloud. And if Iridian enforcement shows up before the packets land? Nadia looked at the plotting wall. Then we will know this was never about containment. The first launches began under Station Shadow. 3 maintenance craft peeled away from Mercy's lower service bay under legal transponder codes. 2 tug capsules left from a hired civilian platform drifting in the outer lane. 1 waste reclamation shuttle departed Helix Gate itself, technically empty, except its filter drums had been replaced with sealed treatment packs 6 hours earlier by a dock worker Kala, trusted with her own life. Nadia watched every signal move across the board. For 9 minutes, no one challenged them. 4:12, they stayed invisible in the traffic weave. At minute 14, Helix Gate began transmitting warnings on all medical frequencies. At minute 15, 1 tug vanished from the board. At minute 16, the first packet landed in Lumen's Fall. Rena Sol's voice came through broken by static and motion. We have Earth kits. Repeat. We have Earth kits. Beginning deployment now. The bridge did not cheer. It exhaled. Then the second voice came in from Dreist. We got partial load. Not enough for all sectors. Then Talon Verge. Packet arrived damaged, but usable. We can salvage. Then nothing from the 4th route. Sarek leaned over the board. The missing tug. Joran answered from his console. Intercepted or powered down. Hard to tell. Nadia already knew what came next. A vector alarm cut across the bridge. 4 patrol signatures entered local space from the dark side of Helix Gate, sleek and fast, wearing the blue-white tags of Iridian Fleet Stabilization Command. Myra's face hardened. There it is. Not a customs response. Not a quarantine response. A military response. The lead Iridian vessel hailed Mercy on a secured channel. The commander introduced himself as Commodore Iller's son and informed Nadia that her vessel was now under restricted enforcement observation pending review of potential biological treaty violations. Treaty violations. For sending medicine. Nadia let the phrase settle in the room because it mattered that her crew heard it plainly. Commodore, she said, my ship is a hospital vessel operating under humanitarian preservation law and dual emergency clearance. Your recent actions may have compromised regional stability. Regional stability is already compromised. That is why we are here. You deployed unlicensed treatment. I deployed treatment that works. You are not authorized to make that determination. Nadia glanced at the live clinical feed from Lumen's Fall. A child who had been graying at the lips 2 hours earlier was now stable enough to sleep. Then she looked back at the comm screen. I already did, she said. The comm line chilled by several degrees. Commodore's son did not threaten her with weapons. Men like him understood that the cleanest coercion left no scorch marks. Instead, he informed her that further unauthorized transfers would be treated as escalation. Any attempt to move Mercy closer to the colony cluster would be met by containment action. He called it containment 3 times. He never called it what it was: a blockade. That night, while Iridian ships held position beyond effective protest range, Elias sent another data packet. This one hurt more. It contained internal messages from the Vesper Reach Logistics Coordination Office. The administrator he had named earlier, Daverkesh, had been quietly altering distribution maps for 5 days. He shifted Helion shipments toward licensed contract labor enclaves and away from mixed civilian sectors. He created apparent shortfalls in human clinics, then blamed those shortfalls on Earth's inability to deliver support under proper standards. One attached note made Nadia read it twice. Maintain visible scarcity in independent sectors. Pressure improves compliance. No names above it. No signature. Just routing metadata pointing upward into a strategic office tied to the Sector Civic Stabilization Board. Not just profit, then. Design. By the second week of the hold, Vesper Reach was no longer one outbreak. It was 5 linked emergencies feeding each other. Lumen's fall remained the clinical center, but Dreist had begun ration unrest after families learned treatment was being withheld under license tiers. Talon Verge faced oxygen shortages because hospital power had been redirected to quarantine infrastructure. 2 outer settlements were now considering sealing their own docks against outside freight because rumor had outrun fact. This was how civil breakdown spread in frontier systems, not in one dramatic tear, but in a series of small rational decisions made under fear until a population began pulling itself apart. From orbit, Nadia fought that collapse with medicine, route maps, and voice. She recorded simplified treatment instructions and sent them to every clinic that could still receive low-band transmission. She cut the protocol down into decision trees local nurses could follow during power fluctuation. She turned Mercy's education deck into a round-the-clock remote support hub where exhausted medics talked scared colony staff through airway support with improvised equipment. Every success made the larger system angrier. Helion Biologics issued a public notice warning against unauthorized Earth-manufactured intervention. The Sector Licensing Board called for restraint and data integrity. Helix Gate renewed the hold. Iridian Fleet widened its patrol arc. And still the Earth Protocol kept saving lives. The truth became impossible to erase. Not because Nadia had made a speech, because patients who should have died were breathing. The first direct blow against her came from the rear. A civilian warehouse on Dreist holding reconfigured treatment stock exploded in a flash fire that rolled through 2 cargo aisles and destroyed nearly 800 dose packs before local brigades contained it. The official explanation was poor temperature control. Elias sent visual proof within the hour. The fire had started at the lock seals. Sabotage. Nadia watched the footage in silence. Then she zoomed in on the access log overlay. One entry had been deleted badly. Joran restored enough of it to identify a maintenance authorization issued through Kesh's office. He's still cleaning the scene, Joran said. He didn't expect we'd catch the old mirror archive. Can we prove intent? Not yet clean enough for legal use. Nadia's gaze stayed on the blackened racks in the warehouse footage. Then use it for tactical truth. Kala leaned against the table. You want this public? Not all of it. Not yet. Nadia zoomed the log again. But enough of it. Mira frowned. That escalates. It already escalated. We were just the last ones being informed. Another problem hit before they could decide how loud to go. Elias vanished. Not in the dramatic sense. Not kidnapped off a deck in front of cameras. His route command channel went dark for 7 hours. His deputies reported conflicting sightings. Then one of Mercy's quiet monitors picked up his emergency tag inside an industrial transit corridor near Dreist's old rail docks. Alive. Moving weakly. Nadia did not ask permission. She sent a disguised medical retrieval team through one of the few civilian channels still slipping beneath Iridian scrutiny. The team found Elias in a service tunnel with a fractured rib, oxygen stress, and the kind of bruising that came from professionals who wanted to send a message without making a martyr. He woke in a hidden treatment room aboard a contracted grain hauler, not on Mercy. Nadia met him there because the hauler still had legal movement clearance for food distribution. He looked at her through the haze of painkillers and said the one thing that mattered first. Kesh isn't the top. I know. There's a strategy office upstream. Not just local. They're mapping dependency conversion. Nadia sat beside the narrow bed. Explain. He winced once before continuing. They've been categorizing frontier populations by reliance risk. Human colonies that keep independent medicine, independent freight, independent fabrication. Vesper Reach was flagged as stubborn. Too many local workarounds. Too many Earth-built systems still in use. So they engineered a crisis severe enough to force compliance. Yes. His voice roughened. Not just here. If this works, they scale it. Nadia felt the room tighten around that sentence. If this works, they scale it. Elias turned his head carefully to look at her. They hit me because I found the route models. Civilian collapse under medicine scarcity, then offer stability under license dependence. They call it integration. She gave a humorless breath. Of course they do. His hand moved on the blanket, stopped halfway to hers, then rested there instead. That was more honest than a gesture would have been. I'm sorry, he said, for being beaten half to death in a tunnel, for being right too late. Nadia let that sit between them. There were 100 older conversations folded inside those words. They did not belong here. Not now. But the feeling did. You stayed, she said. So did you. He closed his eyes once, briefly. Nadia, if you blow this open before you can keep treatment moving, they will let the colonies burn just to teach the lesson. I know. And if you keep treatment moving without blowing it open, they will bury the evidence and call it regulation. I know. When he opened his eyes again, they were clear. So what are you going to do? Nadia answered without hesitation, because the answer had been building in her for days. I'm going to take away their ability to choose quietly. Mercy's next move changed the war. Not because it involved guns, because it attacked the one advantage the system believed it owned. Controlled access to life-saving knowledge. Nadia authorized the release of a stripped emergency version of the Earth treatment protocol to every human colony relay that could still hear her. She removed proprietary layers, cut the formula to what frontier clinics could fabricate or improvise, and attached plain language field instructions with no political framing and no accusation. Just this. If your patients are crashing, do this first. If their breathing fails, do this second. If you have only one working support frame, use it here. If you have no certified access to System Drug X, stop waiting. Kala objected only once, softly. Once this is out, we don't get it back. Nadia nodded. Neither do the dead. The release spread faster than Helix Gate could choke it. Human clinics mirrored it. Independent aid ships copied it. Neutral station medics quietly forwarded it to non-human partners who had seen enough frontier death to distrust licensing boards. Within 12 hours, the protocol had become impossible to contain. Publicly, the licensing board condemned the release as irresponsible. Privately, it triggered panic. Because the protocol worked. Because it worked cheaply. Because it reduced Helion's leverage. Because it proved that a frontier population could survive with human-built medicine outside control dependence. On the ground in Dreist, Nadia saw the turning point for herself. She was in a converted machine hall, kneeling on cold decking beside a young maintenance worker whose lungs were failing faster than the clinic staff could explain. The hall had once serviced agricultural loaders. Now it held 37 cots, 6 pressure frames, and the smell of metal dust beneath disinfectant. The worker's sister stood nearby, with both hands pressed to her own mouth. They told us the licensed doses were enough, she said. They said if he got worse it meant he had an underlying weakness. Nadia did not waste breath condemning the statement. Systems loved to turn design failure into personal inadequacy. She checked the chart, overrode the old sequence, and started the revised protocol herself. Kala adjusted the support line while a local clinician monitored saturation. For 30 seconds, nothing changed. For 60, the numbers fell more slowly. At 90, the worker's breathing stopped fighting itself and began to synchronize with the assist rhythm. The sister made a sound Nadia would remember long after all the policy language blurred away. Not relief exactly. Relief is clean. This was raw. The sound of someone who had been preparing to watch a life leave and had been forced, suddenly, to hope again. Word moved through the hall, so quickly Nadia felt it happen physically. Heads turned. Staff crossed from other beds. A man on the far side tried to sit up and ask if the Earth sequence would work for him too. It was one patient in one improvised ward on one colony among many. And still that moment mattered. Because the larger system had built its pressure on abstraction. Tiers, compliance, review, certified access, managed scarcity. A frontier population did not resist abstractions with better philosophy. It resisted by seeing one person survive who had been expected to die. That evening, Dreist's local medical board, which had spent a week trying to stay neutral and alive at the same time, quietly issued an internal note authorizing clinicians to prioritize practical efficacy over licensing sequence in acute respiratory collapse. It did not mention Earth by name. It did not need to. Nadia read the message on a cracked tablet while standing under a leaking conduit and understood that something had shifted below the level of governments. The people actually holding pressure masks to human faces had made their choice. Once that happened, law had to work much harder to reclaim obedience. Iridian Fleet reacted by moving 2 ships closer to Mercy and broadcasting a formal warning that unauthorized distribution of biomedical practice could destabilize border peace. Nadia read the notice twice and almost laughed from the sheer ugliness of the language. Border peace, as if children had not already died for it. Earth Command finally sent the answer it had delayed as long as possible. Rear Directorate Medical Operations acknowledged receipt of Mercy's evidence, recognized the outbreak suppression as probable hostile manipulation, and informed Nadia that political channels were fragmenting. Some sectors wanted a formal protest. Some wanted a military escort. Some wanted her ordered home before. The crisis could be used against Earth more broadly. In other words, Earth itself was split. She could almost hear the fear beneath the language. Not fear of guilt. Fear of trigger points. Fear that a wrong move at Helix Gate would hand anti-human blocks the justification they had been waiting for. The reply ended with a single line marked Command Discretionary. Field authority remains with Vessel Commander until revoked. Nadia read it twice. They had left the choice to her, which meant if she was right, history might call her necessary. If she was wrong, history would call her the doctor who opened a border crisis into war. That same hour, Vesper Reach sent her something no licensing board could smother. Outcome numbers. Real ones. Clinic by clinic, independent survival rates rose where the Earth Protocol had reached in time. The improvement was not miraculous. It was not pretty. People still died. But the slope changed. The crash phases slowed. The critical to stable transitions increased. Local teams could feel it before they could prove it. And then the neutral stations started asking questions the system could no longer answer. Why had certified mortality data been suppressed? Why were Helion shipments prioritized despite poorer outcomes? Why were hospital lanes under military observation? Why was a humanitarian ship being treated as a destabilizing actor? That was the moment Nadia decided the next strike had to be public enough to alter the balance. She built it carefully, not a speech, not an accusation parade, not something the system could dismiss as human outrage. A record. She assembled verified child fatality logs from Lumen's fall, split-screen oxygen failure records, comparative outcome tables between Helion distribution zones and Earth Protocol zones, route interference logs. She added redacted but undeniable fragments from Kesh's altered distribution orders, warehouse sabotage access traces, the message from Rena's soul, the image of the sleeping child who had stabilized after Earth treatment. Nothing embellished. Then she attached one sentence. These people did not die because help was impossible. They died because help was delayed. She transmitted the packet simultaneously to neutral medical archives, colony civic boards, independent freight unions, and public emergency mirrors across the border sectors. Not the whole galaxy, just enough of it. The reaction was immediate. Helix Gate declared Mercy had breached emergency information discipline. Helion called the packet misleading. The licensing board announced a review. Iridian Fleet, repositioned 3 ships into interdiction posture. Neutral doctors began forwarding the record with personal notes that said, "In effect, we have seen enough." The colonies felt the change first. Dock workers in Dreist blocked one Helion transfer convoy and diverted the cargo to a mixed civilian clinic. A non-human freight captain out of the round corridor quietly opened refrigerated hold space for Earth treatment duplicates. 2 minor stations outside Vesper Reach announced they would honor the practical efficacy of any protocol that reduced mortality under frontier conditions, licensed or not. A story that had been local was now contagious. So was courage. Iridian Fleet tried a subtler form of pressure next. Rather than seize Mercy directly, they started escorting neutral carriers at visible distance whenever those carriers took medical loads from Earthlink channels. The message was perfect in its ugliness. No shots, no formal interdiction, just enough steel in view to remind every captain that the border remembered who owned escalation. Some captains turned back. Some did not. One of those who did not was a round freight master named Sarit who ran refrigerated protein between mixed settlements. He came on a cross-channel conference with Nadia, Mira, and 3 colony logistics heads. His species had no eyebrows and a voice like dry stones in a metal bowl. "You should know," Sarit said, "that I do not do this for your species as such." Mira, too exhausted to care about diplomacy, said, "Good. We need the hold space more than the sentiment." To Nadia's surprise, Sarit gave what passed for a laugh. "I do it because your enemies have begun calling preventable death stability. That sort of language eventually reaches everyone." He delivered 14 hours of cold chain capacity to Talon Verge, enough to keep a line of antivirals synstock viable that would otherwise have spoiled on the dock. When the run succeeded, 2 more non-human carriers followed. Again, that mattered beyond the tonnage moved. The strategy office above Vesper Reach had assumed the crisis could be framed as a local matter of regulation and resistant human mismanagement. Every neutral carrier who helped anyway widened the crack in that narrative. The system had not merely overreached. It had begun to insult the professional ethics of people outside its target zone. That was often when empires and boards alike discovered they had mistaken compliance for respect. But the pressure remained real. Fuel. Invoices climbed. Insurance claims froze. Several frontier stations started asking whether Earth could protect the trade relationships that came with taking its side. Nadia could not promise that. She would not. Instead, she sent something smaller and truer to those stations. Mortality curves before and after treatment. Route survival estimates with and without delay. Infrastructure guidance for local medical independence. No eslogans. If they chose to help, they would do so with clear eyes. Some declined. Enough accepted. And each acceptance made the border less absolute. That was when the strategic head finally showed itself. Not in person. In doctrine. Joran Pell intercepted a sector memo routed through emergency stabilization channels. Most of it was administrative fog. Buried inside was a planning phrase that matched Elias's warning almost exactly. Dependency conversion through managed scarcity in resistant frontier populations. Managed scarcity. There it was. Clean. Bloodless. Honest in the way monsters often are when they write for themselves. Nadia read the phrase 3 times and felt the last of her hesitation burn away. This was not a corporate abuse orbiting a local outbreak. This was a test case. If Vesper Reach bent, other human colonies would be taught the same lesson with medicine, fuel, fabrication licenses, or freight law. Different tools. Same hand on the throat. For the first time since arriving at Helix Gate, Nadia considered not merely how to save the cluster, but how to make the method fail publicly enough that it could not scale easily elsewhere. The opportunity came from an unlikely place. Controller Laertes Vin requested a private channel. Mira wanted to refuse. Sarek wanted to record and leak it. Nadia did both better. She accepted and recorded. Vin appeared more tired than before. The polished calm had cracked a little around the eyes. "You have turned a containable emergency into a political flashpoint," he said. "No, you turned a medical emergency into a dependency experiment." His jaw tightened almost invisibly. Be careful with words you cannot yet prove. I do not need all the words to prove enough. He studied her, and for the first time he looked not above her, not through her, but directly at her. You still have a way out. Withdraw your ship. Submit your protocol for controlled review. Let the sector response proceed. Nadia almost admired the offer. The cruelty of it was elegant. Proceed toward what? Stabilization, dependence, order, submission. Ven's expression chilled. If you continue, you may force outcomes far larger than this cluster. Nadia leaned slightly toward the screen. You say that like I brought the fleet. He ended the call without another word. 3 hours later, Iridian Fleet moved to seize one of the civilian craft running support for Mercy's distributed network. The craft captain refused to cut engines. The patrol locked tractor lines. Local civilian channel traffic lit up with a standoff before either side could hide it. Families were watching. Dock unions were watching. Neutral medics were watching. Nadia knew exactly how close this was to a fatal mistake. If the civilian craft resisted hard, Iridian could paint it as smuggling under biological threat. If Iridian boarded by force while treatment cargo sat plainly in the hold, they would expose the blockade's moral center to anyone still capable of shame. Nadia opened a direct channel to the civilian captain. Do not resist physical boarding, she said. Transmit cargo manifest live. Transmit patient destination live. Keep the feed running no matter what. Then she opened one to Commodore Senior. If your officers board that craft, she said, the full live stream goes to every archive already carrying our mortality record. It is an unauthorized biomedical carrier. It is carrying breathing support to civilians. It is destabilizing a controlled response. You mean it is showing people what your control is costing? For a long second, neither spoke. Then Sin said something truer than he meant to. This border will not hold if every frontier population decides human methods excuse treaty structure. There it is, Nadia said quietly. Not contamination, not safety, structure. The boarding never happened. Sun released the craft under protest. He had done the calculation. Not Mercy. Visibility. Mercy of Earth finally moved inside Vesper Reach 2 days later. It happened not because the system found a conscience, but because too many cameras, ledgers, and morgues had converged into one undeniable image. A hospital ship from Earth, carrying treatment that worked, had been kept outside while human colonies died under managed scarcity. Even a larger system could not hold that image forever without cost. The clearance came narrow and bitter. Limited movement. Monitored operations. No broad legal concession. Nadia took it anyway. Mercy's lower bays opened. Shuttles dropped in waves. Cala Reyes led the first full deployment team into Lumen's fall with enough pediatric frames to reset an entire ward. Portable scrubber towers went to Talon Verge. Antiviral fabrication stock moved to Dreist underarmed civilian volunteer escort. The ship's remote instruction hubs became physical triage rooms at last. Nadia went down with the third wave. The colony smelled of rain on metal, burned filters, and exhausted bodies. No one cheered when she arrived. This was not that kind of place anymore. They were too tired for triumph, but they made room for the med teams. That was enough. For 30 straight hours, Mercy's people worked until time blurred. They turned freight depots into recovery wards. They rewired failing airlines. They taught local parents how to watch for the collapse signs that meant minutes mattered. They recalibrated old human-built equipment the system had once called obsolete, and which now saved lives simply because it was there and reparable. Nadia went from ward to ward until fatigue made the edges of everything too sharp. In one shelter, she found 3 grandparents running a neighborhood oxygen watch list on a wallboard because they had learned, under blockade, that machines failed less often than scheduling did. In another, a teenage apprentice mechanic had built a rough valve adapter from old agricultural parts after listening to one of Mercy's low-band training sessions twice. These small acts were not heroic in the way governments liked to describe recovery. They were practical, improvised, and stubborn. They were what survival looked like when frontier people understood that no elegant authority was coming soon enough. At Talon Verge, Nadia stood in a scrubber room with Chief Engineer Pelvar, a square-shouldered woman whose hair had been singed by a power surge 3 days earlier. Pel slapped the patch side of a breathing tower and said, "The license replacement unit was scheduled for next month. We would have been dead by then. What kept this one running?" Nadia asked. Pel gave her a look that needed no translation. Old Earth design and bad manners. Nadia made herself remember the line. Later, in Dre's recovery quarter, she watched a mixed civilian crew unload antiviral synth stock from a carrier whose captain had no legal reason to help except disgust. A round loader operator worked beside a human dock worker and a contract nurse from a station that had officially declared neutrality. No one here looked like history in the grand sense. No flags. No triumphant speeches. Just hands lifting cases because policy had failed and lives had not waited. That, Nadia thought, was what the wider system had never really understood about human colonies. Pressure could isolate them for a while. Fear could fragment them. Scarcity could make neighbors ugly to one another faster than anyone liked to admit. But once a frontier population clearly identified the hand on its throat, cooperation could spread with a speed that frightened larger orders more than fleets ever did. Elias returned to duty against medical advice and ended up standing beside Nadia in a converted civic hall that now served as a distribution hub. They had 6 minutes alone near a half-empty water stack while teams moved cases around them. "You look terrible," he said. "So do you." "Good." The old ease flashed between them for a moment. Bruised. Still alive. He watched a line of parents receiving home support kits. "You changed the board." "No," Nadia said. "I made them show it." He nodded slowly. "That may be worse for them." "I hope so." He turned toward her. "When this ends, if it ends, they won't forgive what you did." Nadia looked across the hall at a boy helping his younger sister fit a breathing mask too large for her face. "I'm not looking for forgiveness." The words hung there. Then Elias said, very quietly, "I was supposed to leave service after my last term. I kept putting it off." Nadia glanced at him. There was too much history in the space between one breath and the next. "Elias." "I know." He lifted a hand once and let it fall. "Not now." "No," she said. "Not now." But it mattered that he had said it. Because in a story like this, tenderness did not arrive as escape. It arrived as proof that the life being defended still meant something beyond survival graphs and border law. The final price came from the outer ring settlements. Mercy had reached the central colonies in time to bend the mortality curve, but one peripheral habitat, Bracken Hollow, had been held too long and undercounted too completely. By the time full support arrived, thousands were already gone. Most had died, not in riots or spectacle, but in homes, spare clinics, work barracks, and improvised shelters while waiting for a treatment someone had decided to delay. Nadia walked through Bracken Hollows. Memorial Corridor 3 days later. Names were being written by hand on long thermal sheets because there had been no time to engrave anything else. After Bracken Hollow, Nadia stopped speaking in operational summaries for almost a day. She still gave orders. She still checked route tables and mortality projections. But something in her voice had narrowed. The staff around her understood without discussion that grief was now moving through the ship like a second weather system. Late that night, back aboard Mercy, Kala found her alone in one of the ship's unused observation alcoves. Nadia was sitting with a memorial list for Bracken Hollow on her lap. "I came to tell you the outer wards are stable," Kala said. Nadia nodded, but did not look up. Kala remained in the doorway. "You know what I hate most about this?" Nadia finally raised her eyes. "Only one thing. The language that comes after." Kala stepped inside. The reviews. The statements. The way people who never touched a single patient start using phrases like regrettable loss environment. That pulled a real, sharp breath from Nadia. Almost a laugh. Almost the opposite. "They were alive," Kala said. "That should not need translating." Nadia folded the sheet once more. "I keep thinking about the ones we did save, and it helps. Then I think about how many died waiting within system capacity, and it doesn't. It shouldn't." Kala came beside her then, not as subordinate, but as one tired professional to another. You are not allowed to become the machine they need you to be, she said. Do you understand me? Nadia looked at her. Meaning you are not allowed to flatten this into percentages because they already did that. Feel it. Carry it. Then use it. It was brutal advice, which was why it was good. The next morning, Nadia walked the recovery wards instead of staying on comms. She listened to the families. A dock welder who lost his mother, but kept his twins. A school mechanic who now knew how to service a breathing frame, because no technician had reached their block in time. A grandmother from Talon Verge who held Nadia's hand for an uncomfortable 30 seconds and said only, "You came." None of them needed the whole strategic picture. Most would never see it. Yet each one understood the core truth with a clarity that would have embarrassed half the sector boards. People had been left to die while paperwork remained elegant. That truth, carried in enough ordinary voices, was heavier than policy. By the time Nadia returned to the ship, she knew exactly how she wanted the historical record to feel if others ever tried this method again. Not theatrical, not sanitized, personal enough that no one reading it could hide behind aggregate language for long. She stopped at one section of the memorial corridor and found the ages of the first 4 children from the list she had read on Mercy. 6, 8, 9, 11. They were here now in black print under failing lights. For a moment, she could not move. Then Elias came to stand beside her, not touching, just present. "This is the part they count on," he said after a while. "What part?" "That no one can carry grief and strategy at the same time forever." Nadia looked at the names. Then they should stop counting on human beings. Earth's response arrived after Bracken Hollow. Not a fleet. Not yet. Something more dangerous in the long run. Human colonies across 3 sectors began mirroring local medical independence plans based on Vesper Reach lessons. Freight unions quietly revised emergency carrier packs to prevent license bottlenecks. Neutral clinics requested direct exchange with Earth Med teams outside Helion channels. The phrase managed scarcity started showing up in public hearings, union boards, civic votes, and medical schools. The system had not collapsed, but its method had been named. Sometimes that is the beginning of losing. A week later, as the last acute wards and lumens fall finally began to empty, Nadia stood on an observation deck overlooking the rebuilt landing field. Mercy of Earth was still docked, though not for much longer. The cluster would stabilize without her ship soon, not because the larger order had saved it, because human colonies had learned, again, how quickly they would need to save themselves. Controller Vin had been reassigned pending review. Davrakesh had vanished into protective detention. Helion's public valuation was falling under investigation pressure. Iridian Fleet remained at the border, but farther out now, careful, as if distance itself could erase memory. No one had apologized. No one of importance ever did. Elias stepped onto the deck behind her. "The revised loss count came in," he said. She closed her eyes briefly. "Higher." "Yes." "How much?" He told her. She absorbed it and let the number settle where all the others had settled. "Not gone. Not healed. Carried." After a while he said, "You know they'll study you. That sounds unpleasant. They'll say you broke medical structure." "I did." "They'll say you destabilized the border." The border was stable only if dying quietly counted as stability. He came to stand beside her at the glass. "And some of them," he added, "will say you taught the frontier the wrong lesson." Nadia looked at Mercy, then at the repair towers beyond it, then at the slow return of ordinary traffic over a world that had nearly been taught to accept dependence as civilization. What lesson was that? Elias answered with the smallest trace of his old warmth. That if Earth brings you a doctor, she may also bring you a refusal. This time Nadia did smile, though it hurt. Below them, a child wearing an oversized recovery mask pointed at the hospital ship and tugged her mother's sleeve as if trying to explain something important. The mother listened like the child was describing a star. Mercy of Earth would leave in 2 days. The wider fight would not. There would be investigations, sanctioned threats, policy wars, more elegant names for slower violence. Somewhere deeper inside the larger system, people were already redesigning their methods, trying to imagine how to squeeze humanity next time without leaving fingerprints as obvious as Vesper Reach. But next time would not be the same, because frontier nurses now had the protocol, because freight captains had seen what law could be used for, because neutral doctors had the records, because colonies had watched a hospital ship wait outside their air and then watched it come anyway, because the wider galaxy, or enough of it to matter, had been forced to look not at a speech, not at a hearing, not at a human demanding dignity in a chamber, but at the simple fact of people kept alive by other people who refused the designated shape of obedience. That was harder to spin, harder to forget. Nadia rested one hand against the cool glass. She had not won cleanly. She had not saved everyone. She had exposed Earth's medical methods to rivals, widened the political fracture around the border, and stepped into a conflict that could still grow into something larger and darker. But the colonies were breathing. The children in Lumen's fall had machines now. The lesson in Vesper Reach had not become the lesson the system intended. For now, that was enough to stand on. Elias stayed beside her in silence until the lights of the landing field shifted from work white to evening amber. Neither of them reached for promises that belonged to another season, if it belonged anywhere at all. Still, when he finally spoke, it carried the shape of one. "When you go back to Earth," he said, "don't disappear for 2 years this time." Nadia kept her eyes on the field below. "That depends." "On what?" "Whether the next border catches fire before I unpack." He gave a tired laugh. Then she turned, looked at him fully, and let herself be honest in a way duty rarely allowed. "Also on whether you ask me before I leave." For a second, he just looked at her. Then the answer came simple and steady, the way the best truths often do after too much death. "I'm asking now. No keys. No dramatic hold. Just that." Outside the glass, Mercy of Earth waited under repaired lights, scarred and indispensable. Inside the deck, 2 exhausted people stood in the aftershock of a crisis large enough to bend policy and intimate enough to leave names in a corridor. Beyond them, the Vesper Reach colonies were still wounded. The larger system was still dangerous, or had not fully arrived, but it was close enough now to cast a shape over every future route. Yet somewhere in the noise of engines, med carts, and rebuilding crews, something else had survived with the colonies. Not innocence, not safety, something more durable. The human refusal to let a managed death be called order. That refusal would travel farther than the ship. And the next time a border station tried to hide behind law, while people waited for air, medicine, or a road home, Vesper Reach would already be there like a warning in the memory of the frontier. Earth had not come out untouched. Humanity rarely did. But when a larger system had tried to teach the colonies dependence through delay, it had taught them something else by mistake. That pressure could crush a people, or prove what they would not surrender. Before Mercy departed, Nadia was required to file a final operational accounting to Earth, and the neutral archives that had backed her evidence. She wrote in plain language and hated every line. Supplies delivered. Clinics stabilized. Fatality reduction estimated. Infrastructure damage ongoing. Political risk elevated. Probability of renewed coercive pressure high. Useful facts, all of them. None of them able to hold the full shape of what had happened. So she attached one unofficial appendix, marked clinical ethics note, and kept it shorter than any lawyer would have liked. A frontier medical crisis becomes a weapon the moment access to treatment is delayed for compliance gain. Any system that treats preventable death as an acceptable pressure tool has already crossed into organized violence. Do not wait for that violence to look military before naming it. Mira read the appendix before transmission and said, "Someone is going to hate this." "Many someones," Nadia said. "Good." By then, the clinics in Vesper Reach had started doing something Nadia had almost forgotten to expect in a place after catastrophe. They were planning ahead, not just for the next week, but for the next failure. Local fabrication crews were rebuilding old Earth design support frames because the parts could be machined without license keys. Civic boards were mapping neighborhood oxygen backup chains. Freight unions were sharing route redundancy charts across colonies that had barely trusted one another before the outbreak. Teachers were asking for simplified emergency care training modules to store in school servers. That, more than any statement from Earth, felt like the true answer to the pressure campaign. The system had tried to make dependence feel inevitable. Instead, it had taught the colonies to remember exactly how costly dependence could be. When Nadia signed the final report, she understood that Vesper Reach would never return to what it had been before Helix Gate closed on them. That was tragedy. It was also defense. Mercy of Earth lifted 2 days later under a sky clearing after weeks of chemical rain. The launch was quiet. No parade. No ansim. Just crews at stations, clinics on the ground, now linked into each other by new relay habits, and a final exchange of routine traffic that sounded ordinary enough to fool anyone who had not lived through the last month. Nadia stood once more on the bridge as Helix Gate drifted into distant view. The quarantine lights still burned around its ring, colder now, smaller. Mira came to her station with a departure log. Course plotted for Earth transfer lane. Take us out. Imani Holt pushed power. The ship answered with a low, steady rise. Nadia watched the border shrink. War had started here, in a way. Not with gunfire. With data. With law. With delay. With a child waiting for equipment already within reach.